everyone, Mr. Waller here, back at it again with this week's video lesson. This is our last stop on our history unit lessons. I don't know, you're all so sad to stop learning about history, I know. Some of you might be, I don't know, I'm not there, so don't know, can't really read the room here. Anyways, we're going to be looking at our most recent developments in theater in the good old USA in the 20th century. Now remember, our 20th century means 1900 to 2000. I just realized I was born in the 20th century. And all of you were born in the 21st century. During the 20th century in America, there was a lot happening. There were multiple world wars, there were multiple smaller wars, there were multiple civil rights movements, there were multiple women's rights movements. There was basically, you know, all of 2020 happening throughout an entire, century. Wouldn't that be nice, instead of just 1 year? So, we're going to break down this century in 3 parts, the earlies, the mids, and the lates, to make it a little bit easier to process this, because so much is happening at this time. Even in theater, lots was happening. Let's get started here. Early 1900s, most of the theater that was happening back east in New York. Early New York is a port city. There's lots of people coming in, lots of different styles and cultures all clashing together. So they all started to get together and they started to do what are called vaudeville acts. Vaudeville is actually pretty similar to a circus if you think about it. There's multiple different acts, there's lots of different things happening, but they all take place in one building, and there isn't really a full plot story happening like with the older plays. It's lots of different talents getting together and doing these pretty crazy but really fun shows. With the rise of film, now having sound and music with it, theater had to step up now. They're losing popularity to these films that are much easier to get to and much cheaper as well. So theater people had to come up with new styles of how to make theater more appealing. Enter Oscar Hammerstein and Richard Rodgers, most commonly known as Rodgers and Hammerstein. These two men paved the way for the new form of theater that would sweep the entire nation, musical theater. So, Hammerstein was a composer and Rodgers was a scriptwriter. Together, they started to make new forms of theater that combined all these vaudeville acts together, the use of their actors, all these different talents to make musicals. Musicals were now a huge popular thing. Rodgers and Hammerstein alone came up with so many great plays like Cinderella, Oklahoma, and The Sound of Music. All 3 of those from these 2 men that came up with this great new idea of musical theater. Now we are reaching the late 1900s. Now we have all these new styles of theater both happening in film and on stage, but here's the problem. Now during the 60s and towards the end of the 80s, people are not going to shows as often as they used to. During the 60s especially, things were pretty chaotic around the entire country. There's civil rights movements happening everywhere, there are protests for the Vietnam War happening. People are trying to get their voices heard more often now. Because of this need to have voices heard more often, there's another movement happening in theater during this time. It's called political theater. Now, politics and theater kind of go hand in hand, since the beginning with the Greeks. The Greeks started with theater, and they would use it to criticize their political leaders all the time. It just kind of came naturally. However, that started to change during this time in particular because people weren't just trying to criticize their leaders, they were trying to show how society was acting at the time as well. People didn't want to just criticize their leaders now, they wanted to reflect how society was feeling at the time with all this chaotic stuff happening. This happened even earlier than the 20th century too. It happened in the 19th century with a very, very famous play. It's called A Doll's House. Okay. There's a man named Henrik Ibsen. He was the author of this play called A Doll's House. Here's what A Doll House is all about. A Doll House is about a woman named Nora living in 1878 in Denmark. She's a ballerina, she's a mother of 2, and she has a husband named Torvald. Torvald gets very, very sick at one point because all the pollution and coal burning at the time in the cities in that time period would literally kill you. So they sent Torvald off to the countryside to try and get better. Or rather, just Nora does. And that's not something a woman does in this time period. So for months at a time, Nora becomes the head of the household. She forges Torvald's signature to get past all the different laws around women not being able to do most of the things that men could do at that time. And she takes care of the entire estate and the kids, basically doing everything, you know, awesome single mother stuff, right? Until Torvald comes back from his vacation. Torvald comes back not knowing that his wife is basically running the entire estate while he's gone, and tries to put things back to normal. Now keep in mind, for audiences at the time, watching Nora even do half of this stuff is extremely controversial. This is like driving on the wrong side of the road levels of what are you doing? So Nora, now frustrated with Torvald not respecting what she can actually do for him, does the unthinkable for an 1878 woman. The play ends with Nora grabbing a suitcase and leaving. She leaves behind her husband and her 2 kids and sets off on her own. And that's it. That's how the play ends. That was it. Curtain closed. Bam. That's it. And they lost their minds. So audiences lost their absolute minds at the end of the show. That's not what a woman is supposed to do. A woman needs to stay in the kitchen and take care of the kids. A woman can't just leave the house. But Henrik Ibsen, the author, just went, yeah, they should. What's wrong with that? That's just, they're people. That's what people do if they're in a bad situation. So that happened in 1878, and because of that play, that started to spark that conversation, which is what theater is supposed to do. It sparks the conversation of, well, maybe women should have more rights than that, right? Why can't more women just go out and do that? So that happened in the late 19th century, around 1878, when the play was actually take place. And then towards the beginnings of the 20th century, towards the early 1900s, so around like 1919, 1918, all the different European countries start to give women the right to vote. And then those women inspired the women in America to do their own women's suffrage movement in 1920. So all this conversation coming from was made more popular. I'm not saying it started it, but it was made more popular by A Doll's House here. A reflection on how society was treating women at the time. So theater towards the end of the 20th century is becoming a lot more influential. It's becoming a lot more thought-based rather than just show-based. At this time, Hollywood's now growing, Broadway is growing. Things are becoming more and more grand spectacle, but they're getting a lot deeper as well. Change is happening to the people, and therefore change happens to the art form, as it happens throughout all history. And that is all for today's lesson. I know it was a longer one, sorry. If you're in class now, I turn that time over to your in-classroom teacher. And if you're online, head into the modules and get to work. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day and stay safe. Bye-bye.